And our next speaker is Paul Tranter, who is the Senior Lecturer in Geography at the University of New South Wales. And his research interests include the themes of child-friendly environments and sustainable cities, the public health impacts of motorsport, interesting in view of what's going on in Melbourne at the moment, the promotion of active transport through the concept of effective speed, and the implications of peak oil for children. And he's given his talk a very fascinating title, The Monster Problem of Child's Play, Coping with Peak Oil.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. So the question is, coping with peak oil, is it a monster problem, is it child's play, or is it a combination of both? Now there's two big issues associated with peak oil that you're all familiar with, ignorance and denial. But having said that, some very important people have started to talk about oil. The President of the United States in his State of the Union address in 2006 admitted America is addicted to oil. And 2 years later, it's still addicted to oil. Now, you'll be relieved to know that this paper is not based on the intellectual insights of George W. Bush, but it was profoundly influenced by a major event in late 2001. And if you're on the ball, you'll realise that I'm referring to the release of the movie Monsters, Inc. Now, for those of you who haven't seen this movie, it's a very popular Disney movie, a Pixar animated Disney movie. When it came out at the movies, it was a big box office hit. When it went to video, it was in the top 10 of the video rentals in the United States for several weeks. It's maintained its popularity for several years, and just last month it was shown on Australian television and it got almost 1 million viewers. The important thing about this movie is that it's a movie for children, but there's all sorts of messages in it for adults as well, if you can do a critical analysis of it. So I'm going to use this movie as a way to introduce the very serious issues of child-friendly cities, children's rights and peak oil, but do it in an entertaining way. One thing we do need to be careful of, though, is that we don't have a simplistic interpretation of the movie. For the benefit of you who haven't seen the movie, it's set in Monstropolis, the monster world. And here's James P. Sullivan and Mike Wazowski on their way to work in the Monsters, Inc. factory. Now, Monstropolis runs on children's scream energy, and that's harvested in the factory Monsters, Inc. This is the way the factory works. Those doors there are children's bedroom closet doors, which are portals into the worlds of human children. And the way the factory works is that the scarer monsters burst through the children's bedroom closet doors in the middle of the night and get ready for a shot. They do the monster scaring thing, I won't give you the roar, but that scares the children and it makes them scream, and then that scream energy is captured by the Monsters, Inc. factory and refined into clean, dependable energy. However, Monsters, Inc. and Monstropolis has a problem, and that is that children are getting harder to scare. So what that means is that there's a scream shortage or an energy shortage, which we could in fact call peak scream. That's big news in the Monstropolis horn, and if you have a close look at this, down the bottom you might be able to read prices double at the pump. And this is a big issue in Monstropolis because, like oil, its scream is very, very important. In fact, in Monstropolis, it's the only source of energy. Then the story gets interesting, and a human child, Boo, gets into Monstropolis through an unclosed closet door. And the monsters discover from watching the child at play that laughter energy is 10 times more powerful than scream energy. And in true Disney fashion, the monsters and the children live happily ever after. Now, there's a big danger here that if you look at this movie and that's all you get out of it, you'll assume that there will be a techno fix to solve the problems of peak oil. There won't be. So the question we should ask is, can we ensure children's safety after peak oil in our real world as easily as in Monstropolis after peak scream? So we'll have a look at what peak oil might mean for children, and first we'll look at the negative side of it and the bad news. The first bit of bad news is that it's likely to lead to a global shortage of food, and that's not good news for children, so widespread starvation. There'll be increasing numbers of children living in poverty, and that will lead to a whole range of other issues because poverty is related to a whole range of children's rights issues. And there's likely to be increasing number of wars over remaining oil supplies. Now, if you look at those sorts of impacts of peak oil on children and think about the Millennium Development Goals, they're not good news for the eradication of poverty and starvation. They're not good news for improving maternal health. They're not good news for reducing child mortality. But that's the bad news. But it's not all bad news for children. Last year, in the International Journal of Children's Rights, Scott Sharp and I published an article called Children and Peak Oil, an Opportunity in Crisis. And I've got some copies of that here if you'd like to see them. And if you go onto my webpage at the University of New South Wales at ADFA and search around there, you can find an electronic copy as well. So in this article we say, yes, peak oil is a major crisis for children, but we also ask what opportunities might come from peak oil for children. And we argue that peak oil provides an opportunity, but an opportunity to consider the present. If we can see peak oil coming and start to prepare our cities for peak oil, then there's major opportunities for children. One of the things we can ask is what can we learn about improving children's lives now, in the present, by considering what it's going to be like after oil gets very scarce. And related to that, we can think about our current dependence on cheap oil, which might not last for too much longer. How does that affect the way in which we conceptualise and treat children? And how will the lack of cheap oil change that? Now, if we go back to Monsters Inc., if you have seen Monsters Inc., by the way, who's seen Monsters Inc.? Okay, so the rest of you need to go out and see Monsters Inc. It's probably the most important movie ever produced. And I should point out that I'm not sure whether Disney did it on purpose, produced a movie about peak oil, but it'd be interesting to find that out too. What Monsters Inc. does is it illustrates the changing conceptions of human children.
Can you speak up?
Oh, okay. How's that? Is that any better? Okay. The changing conceptions of human children. So at the start of the movie, the monsters believe that human children are toxic and dangerous. Then they discover that, in fact, this human child is harmless. He's not going to hurt us at all. Then they realise that the way in which they extract scream energy from human children is, in fact, terrifying for the children. So they realise how vulnerable they are. And finally, they realise that this human child is very capable. Here she is protecting Sully, the friendly monster, from Randall, the evil monster. But this human child is so capable that the monsters learn from a human child the solution to their energy problems. Now, in the real world, we see the same thing. It's that children are conceptualised either as a nuisance, they get in the road of the important things that adults do, like drive cars, or they're vulnerable and they need to be protected from the dangers of the modern world that we have created with cheap oil, or we can see children as capable social actors, and that's where we really need to be looking, treating children as capable social actors, and I'll come back to that point later. Cheap oil, though, has affected our conceptualisation of children, and what it does is it reinforces the view that children are vulnerable. What are they vulnerable to? They're vulnerable to all the range of dangers that's made possible by cheap oil, and traffic is the clearest example of that. Ironically, a lot of parents protect their children from that danger by driving them everywhere and consequently making the whole thing worse. So cheap oil has allowed us to make our cities less child-friendly. Just like to talk about what child-friendly cities mean, and there's two main features of child-friendly cities. The first is that in a child-friendly city, children should have the freedom to playfully and safely explore their environment in ever-increasing circles as they mature, without the threats of traffic danger or violence or pollution. And related to that, they should have a sense of connection with their community and their neighbourhood, a sense that they're a valued and important part of the local community. Now, in Monstropolis, the monster world, it's a child-friendly environment for the monster children. And if you look at Monstropolis, this is one view of the street where the friendly monsters live. It's safe, clean, polluted, generally peaceful place. This is the friendly monsters walking to work, so that's a child-friendly sign. Children can play on the sidewalks under the watchful eye, and I mean eye in this case, of the adult monsters. And it's safe enough for children to come along on their skateboards and skate from the sidewalk onto the street.